He remembers that we are but dust. Welcome back to Why Hope, the video series that explores reasons for hope in our day. This is Season 8, Episode 3. In Season 8, we're looking at God reaching us and meeting us in our need. And in this episode, Episode 3, we're going to talk about God meeting us in our frailty. Or as one of the writers on the Psalms, Nancy de Classe-Wolford, says, in our fallibility, our frailty, and our finitude, which is rather beautiful, I think. Well, we'll talk about our fallibility next time when we talk about God meeting us in our guilt. But today we're going to think about God meeting us in our frailty. Now, we've spoken in a number of previous videos about God, about Jesus' incarnation, and about how Jesus therefore shares the human condition. He knows what it is to experience frailty, to be tired, to be weak, to be hungry, thirsty, to grieve, and so on. We've talked about that in some detail, so I invite you to have a look out for those videos if you haven't seen them before. So today I want to explore this through the lens of two Psalms, Psalm 90 and Psalm 103. There's so much more we could say, but we're just going to sit with these Psalms for the few minutes of this video. So let's first of all start with Psalm 90. Lord, you have been our dwelling place in all generations. Before the mountains were brought forth, or ever you had formed the earth and the world, from everlasting to everlasting, you are God. Now, the psalmist is going to go on to talk about our frailty, but here at the beginning, he plants his meditation, he plants his thought in the eternity of God. Now, I suppose we could look at this two ways. We might say that this is going to make us feel smaller, make us feel weaker, make us feel even more frail when we consider ourselves as just that tiny speck of dust in comparison with the infinity that is God. But for the psalmist, that's not how he sees it. He certainly sees God's majesty, his might, his eternity as a dwelling place for our reflection and our meditation and our worship. It's a place that should bring us to. It's an idea that should bring us to a place of awe. But it's never something that reduces him to despair, that makes him writhe on the ground saying, I am nothing, I am nobody, I am worthless, and therefore God just stamp on me. That's not the sort of idea that he's exploring at all. So, having begun by setting this in the context of God's eternity, he goes on to speak about our death. You turn us back to dust and say, turn back, you mortals. For 1,000 years in your sight are like yesterday when it is past, or like a watch in the night. You sweep them away, they are like a dream, like grass that is renewed in the morning. In the morning it flourishes and is renewed, in the evening it fades and withers. And we all know this ourselves. When I do my weeding, sometimes I'm lazy. Perhaps if I'm not stuck in properly with the weeding, I'm just leaning over in my good clothes, and I pull a couple of weeds out and I just throw them down on the flower bed. And by the evening, they're withered. They're withered. Their roots have been uprooted. There's no nourishment coming to them, and they are just limp and starting to decay. And within a few days, they have gone brown and disappeared to a husk. This is the image that the psalmist is sitting with in the light of God's eternity. He sits with the frailty of the human condition, and in particular the brevity of our lives. I'll skip a couple of verses and go on to verse 9. For all our days pass away under your wrath, our years come to an end like a sigh. The days of our life are 70 years, or perhaps 80 if we are strong. Even then their span is only toil and trouble. They are soon gone, and we fly away. The psalmist really is having a moment here, isn't he? Maybe he's just watched the death of a loved one and has been brought face to face with his own mortality again. Maybe he's getting old. Maybe he's seeing his own body start to let him down. But for whatever reason, he sets his own frailty and the brevity of his own life in the context of God's eternity, and he finds this a cause for hope rather than for despair. Reading on, who considers the power of your anger? Your wrath is as great as the fear that is due you. So teach us to count our days, that we may gain a wise heart. This is interesting to me because the psalmist here is intentionally sitting with his frailty. He's saying, I'm not going to deny this. I'm not going to pretend it's not there. He's saying, Lord, help me to face this square on. This is something we're really bad at in our modern societies, I think. It used to be that the unspeakable was sex and the utterly confrontable was death, and now it's the other way around. My grandmother used to tell a story of when she as a child was taken next door to view the body of one of her playmates who had died. I'm not sure I'd want to take things quite as far as that, and I'd never have done that to my children. But nonetheless, we have perhaps swung too far in our day, and we deny death. And enormously valuable as our medical professions are, and I speak as somebody who used to be a doctor, sometimes there is such a fear of death that we are trying to help people deny or prevent what is absolutely inevitable. Although I will say one thing about that, which is sometimes people talk about there's no two things as certain as death and taxes, or the one thing that's certain in life is we're all going to die. And I always want to chip in when I hear that and say, no, the Lord may return. We may not die. The Lord may return. Let's not slip into such what we might call an imminent frame. In other words, such a worldview that forgets that God might break in. He has promised that he will one day, and maybe it'll be in our lifetime. But setting that aside for now, unless the Lord returns, we will all die. And the psalmist is inviting us not to deny that, not to seek to try and forget it or smooth away its reality, but he's saying to God, let me live with this reality, because then actually I will live better in the light of the fact that I am human and mortal. And just read to the end of the psalm. Turn, O Lord, how long? Have compassion on your servant. Satisfy us in the morning with your steadfast love, that we may rejoice and be glad all our days. And I like to look at this in two ways. There is both the morning by morning renewal of God's love, which the scriptures speak about in more than one place. The fact that every morning is, if you like, a resurrection. Every morning we have been given our breath again for a new day. But reading this as a Christian, reading this as one who looks forward to a bright new morning, the day that I wake up and see the face of my Lord. Maybe we can take this psalm this prayer to an additional depth. Satisfy us in the morning with your steadfast love, that we may rejoice and be glad all our days. And then just to read to the end. Make us glad as many days as you have afflicted us, and as many days as we have seen evil. Let your work be manifest to your servants, and your glorious power to their children. Let the favour of the Lord our God be upon us, and prosper for us the work of our hands. Oh, prosper the work of our hands. This is a prayer that I begin the day with sometimes. It's a prayer that I pray over my working life. And here, as the psalmist embraces his own mortality, views it in the light of God's eternity, sees that as grounds for hope, not for despair. He is led to bring his own work before the Lord, asking that the favour of the Lord may be upon it. More briefly, let me turn to Psalm 103, and I'm going to return to this next week. So for now, I'm just going to read you a few verses from verse 13. As a father has compassion for his children, so the Lord has compassion for those who fear him, for he knows how we were made. He remembers that we are dust. I love this. The Lord knows how we are made. He was there when it happened. He is the creator. He knows the frailty, the finitude of our human frame. He understands our need for sleep, our need for rest. He understands that we struggle when we are in pain, that we struggle with our mental health. All of these things, he knows he knows the extremes, the limits of our capacity and our ability, because he made us. And then the psalmist goes on to say, as for mortals, their days are like grass. There's that metaphor again. They flourish like a flower of the field, for the wind passes over it and it is gone, and its place knows it no more. But The steadfast love of the Lord is from everlasting to everlasting on those who fear him, and his righteousness to children's children, to those who keep his covenant. Once again, the psalmist sees God's eternity as a place for hope, because it is not just God who is eternal, it is his love that is eternal. It is his steadfastness and his faithfulness that is as eternal as he is. God knows our frailty, and we can locate ourselves within his eternity, within his loving eternity. And once again, we can find grounds for hope.